Hello, my friend. Welcome to Dreamy Nights Classics. Tonight, an old tale drifts open once more, a story woven from wonder, softened by time, and carried here on the hush of evening. It is a tale of curiosity settling into stillness, where imagination loosens its bright edges and turns as gentle as moonlight on water. Here, an age-old journey becomes a sanctuary, whispered, unhurried, and tender as a dream just beginning to bloom. So rest beneath the quiet of night and let the timeless story find you in its softest form. When you're ready, our story begins. Before the first page turns, a small offering of gratitude gently rises. If these quiet moments bring warmth or comfort to the winding paths of your nights, your soft subscription will let these stories find their way back to you whenever rest feels far. Our presence here is deeply appreciated, a lantern glowing in the window of this shared quiet space. And now, beneath the dimming light, the story unfolds. Evening settled over the world with the delicate patience of falling petals. The last traces of sunlight thinned into amber threads that clung to the horizon, while the first blue sigh of night rose to meet them. In this soft in-between, Alice sat near an open window, her fingers lightly resting upon the spine of a book she had not yet chosen to read. A faint breeze moved through the room, carrying with it the scent of warm grass and distant chimneys, drifting in gentle waves that seemed to exhale the day's final thoughts. The room around her glowed with the dim warmth of lamplight, its golden shimmer brushing against shelves, curtains, and the quiet shapes of forgotten toys. Dust motes floated lazily through the air, rising and falling like tiny seeds, caught in a slow tide. Each one sparkled briefly as it passed through the warm radiance, then dissolved into the dim beyond. The world felt suspended, not still, but gently waiting. Alice watched the fluttering dust with a gaze softer than usual. She did not feel restless, nor eager, nor even particularly curious in the way she so often was. Instead, the evening wrapped around her like a thoughtful pause, a moment where nothing needed to be chased, solved, or explained. Her questions, the countless ones that usually danced through her mind, drifted within her quietly now, like pages not yet turned. A faint rustle came from the garden outside. Leaves brushed against each other with the hush of whispered secrets, stirred by a tender wind that seemed to move not as weather, but as intention. Their sound mingled with the soft ticking of a clock somewhere deeper in the house, each slow beat stretching into the next with unhurried grace. The air felt touched by memory, though Alice could not place whose. She shifted slightly, letting her fingertips trace the gentle patterns etched into the wooden sill. The texture was smooth in some places, softly worn in others, as though many hands before hers had rested where she now did. The window pane above held the faintest reflection of her face, blurred by twilight. It was not a mirror, not truly, but it carried the same quiet invitation, a moment to simply look, to simply be. As she drew a slow breath, inhaling the soft scent of evening soil and flowers that had begun to close their petals for the night. As she exhaled, a feather-light calm spread through her body, easing her shoulders, softening her jaw, guiding her deeper into the cushion beneath her. Thoughts drifted in gentle spirals, not sharp, not insistent. They floated like distant paper lanterns, glowing faintly against a growing night. Somewhere nearby, a teacup settled on its saucer with a muted chime, as if acknowledging the settling hush. The sound was delicate, rounded at the edges, its resonance fading into the quiet like water disappearing into sand. A soft curl of steam rose from the cup, carrying a mild herb fragrance that wrapped around Alice like a warm shawl. She did not reach for it. She only watched the steam twist upward, silver in the half-light, until it thinned into nothing. As the sun fully withdrew, the lamplight deepened, casting long, velvety shadows across the floor. They stretched slowly, calmly, as though even the dark wished to arrive without disturbing the peace that held the room. The shadows touched the rug, the bookcase, the hem of Alice's dress, soft as a sigh, gentle as the closing of eyes. The stillness around her did not feel empty. It felt full, like a room quietly listening. And she, for once, felt no need to fill that listening with words or movement. The questions she usually asked, why, how, when, seemed to settle themselves into softer shapes, content to rest rather than shimmer. Her mind loosened its grip, like a ribbon untied. There was something tender in this quiet, something she could not name but could feel, a sense that she was standing at the threshold of a dream, not yet formed. A dream waiting patiently, without urgency or expectation. She did not know what it would contain or where it would lead. But tonight, that unknowing did not stir her with curiosity. Instead, it soothed her, like a gentle hand smoothing the creases of her thoughts. Alice leaned back slightly, letting her head rest against the cushioned chair. The fabric was soft beneath her, textured with faint floral patterns worn by time. Her fingertips brushed along the armrest, tracing its familiar shape. Each movement was slow, deliberate, as though she were performing a quiet ritual of settling in. Outside, the sky deepened into a muted indigo, brushed with the faintest glow of distant stars. Now a single bird called from its perch, a low, drowsy sound, then fell silent. Beyond that, only the murmur of leaves remained, their rustling gradually blending into the rhythm of the night. A subtle warmth grew behind Alice's eyes, easing them closed for a moment. In that brief darkness, she sensed the world softening around her, not fading, but becoming gentler, more dreamlike. The quiet pressed closer, tender and cool, like the first touch of a night breeze across her cheek. When she opened her eyes again, the room felt slightly altered, not changed, but softened, as though dipped in a wash of silver calm. The lamplight shimmered with a slow, steady pulse. The air felt lighter, carrying an almost imperceptible hum. The threshold between wakefulness and dreaming had thinned, as her gaze drifted toward the open book at her side. Its pages, faintly illuminated, seemed to glow with a subtle invitation, not to read, but to drift, to let the story she had not yet chosen open itself in its own time, its own way. She lifted a hand and lightly touched the edge of a page. The texture was cool beneath her fingertip, smooth and whisper-thin. She did not turn it. She only felt its presence, its softness, its quiet promise. A thought drifted through her, gentle, almost formless. What if the questions she carried did not need answers tonight? What if they wished only to rest? The thought settled into her like a feather into a nest. She breathed it in. She let it soften her. She allowed it to become the hush that held the room. As she gazed back out the window, the first true star of evening shimmered above the darkening garden. Its light, faint, but steady. She watched it flicker gently, as though nodding to her unspoken reflections. In its quiet pulse, she felt a subtle pull, inward, downward, toward a dream that waited with patience and shimmered like the star itself. The garden began to blur slightly at the edges, the leaves swaying with a rhythm that felt almost like breath. The night seemed to lean closer, brushing her thoughts with its cool fingertips. And somewhere in that soft leaning, somewhere between the lamplight and the rising hush, the first delicate threads of Wonderland began to weave themselves around her. Not loudly, not brightly, but as a drifting dream of unasked questions, finally settling into stillness. The hush of evening deepened around Alice with a tenderness that felt almost protective. She remained in her chair, still framed by lamplight, yet something within her had shifted, a gentle loosening, an inward tilt toward rest. The world outside her window continued its quiet descent into night, but the deeper descent, the one unfolding softly within her, had already begun. Her eyelids fluttered once, twice, and the warm glow around her seemed to shimmer. Edges blurred, not in confusion, but in a slow melting of boundaries. Room into quiet, quiet into breath, breath into dream. The scent of cooling tea lingered in the air, mingling with the faint sweetness from flowers outside, creating a soft veil of fragrance that drifted across her senses. It felt like stepping into a memory she had never lived yet somehow recognized. A small movement near her feet caught her attention, though she did not react with surprise. It was simply there, part of the evening's unfolding. A slip of white, perhaps the flutter of fabric, perhaps the flick of a tail, drifted past the hem of her dress. It moved with the delicate confidence of something meant to be seen only in the moments when the world grows quiet enough to notice. Alice leaned forward slightly, the chair beneath her creaking softly, its sound rounded and warm. Her hand rested on the seat's wooden arm, feeling the grain beneath her fingertips. The texture seemed more vivid now, each curved line of the wood guiding her attention inward. Her breath deepened, steady and unhurried. A faint glow touched the floor ahead of her, pooling like spilled moonlight. It shimmered gently, or wavering as though stirred by a breeze that existed only in dreams. Alice rose, not out of urgency, but out of a quiet pull. The sense that her body moved toward the glow as naturally as a leaf drifts toward the current. Her feet touched the rug softly. The fabric felt warmer than the air, thick and plush beneath her steps. As she moved toward the glow, the room around her seemed to tilt, not physically, but atmospherically. A sensation like the first moments of floating in water. The lamplight dimmed further, stretching into elongated beams that shimmered along the walls. The window's reflection deepened to silver, holding a trace of her shape, blurred like a memory softened by time. Alice's breath eased into a rhythm that matched the hush around her. Each inhale felt like gathering light. Each exhale felt like dissolving into calm. Oh, she stepped closer to the glow on the floor, noticing now that it opened gently, the way a curtain might part for a breeze. It revealed a downward path, not abrupt, not deep, but a slow, spiraling descent shaped from beams of golden dusk. The edges of the spiral were soft, feathered with floating lights that drifted upward in lazy arcs. They resembled sparks from a distant fireplace, rising slowly only to fade into quiet darkness. When Alice stepped forward, her foot touched the top of the downward path with a weightless ease, as though the ground adjusted itself to support her. The moment she stepped in, the descent began. Not a fall, not a tumble, but a gentle drifting, as though she had become lighter than the air around her. The spiral carried her downward in smooth, gliding motion. The walls around her were not walls at all, but shifting textures, ripples of soft parchment, gentle strokes of watercolor light, drifting petals that swirled without touching her. Each texture seemed to shimmer with its own soft glow, illuminating her path in hues of amber, violet, and muted gold. The air grew cooler, but in a comforting way, like the breath of night meeting warm skin. A delicate scent rose around her, a mixture of pressed flowers, old books, and the faint sweetness of honey. It wrapped around her in gentle currents, guiding her deeper into the dream. Below her feet, the spiral pathway seemed to pulse faintly, brightening and softening with each slow rotation. It felt alive, though not in a way that startled her. It felt more like the slow heartbeat of the world she was entering, steady and reassuring. Her fingers brushed against drifting fragments of light, each one evaporating at her touch like a sigh. As she descended further, faint echoes emerged. They were soft, like whispers spoken through layers of silk. Sometimes they sounded like turning pages, other times like the distant pluck of a harp string. None of them formed words. They were simply sound textures, stirring the air with quiet intention. Alice's hair floated slightly around her, weightless in the downward drift. The sensation reminded her of moments when she had lain back in tall grass, the world tilting, her body relaxing into the earth's gentle cradle. The descent felt much the same, grounding in its softness, even as it carried her through the unseen. She reached out a hand, letting her fingertips glide through the air. The surrounding glow shifted in response, deepening into cooler tones. Soft lavender, pale blue, a muted silver. Color moved around her like watercolor spreading through paper, always slow, always tender. Another whisper drifted past her ear, this one resembling the faint rustle of feathers. She followed the sound with her gaze and saw a small flurry of white shapes drifting upward. They were neither birds nor pages nor petals, but something between, the ephemeral form of dreams before they choose their shape. They floated with her, swirling gently before rising toward the distant darkness above. The spiral gradually widened, creating a sense of openness around her. The glowing textures shifted into a vast chamber of soft twilight, where light pooled and swayed as though stirred by a quiet tide. Her descent slowed, becoming almost still. The air carried a faint, crystalline coolness, like the breath of early dawn before the sun rises. She hovered for a moment in that pause, suspended within a dreamlit stillness. The world around her waited, not expectantly, but with the patient calm of something that has existed for ages. She sensed that she was not falling into Wonderland. She was drifting into it, carried by the slow unfolding of her own inner quiet. The final downward motion came like a soft exhale. The path beneath her dissolved into a gentle landing, a floor that felt neither solid nor soft, but something in between. It yielded slightly beneath her feet, like moss beneath moonlight. As she stood, she looked around and found herself in a long hallway that stretched into softened distance. Its ceiling arched overhead, glowing like the inside of a lantern. Doors lined the walls on either side, each one illuminated by a faint halo of warm light. Their colors shifted subtly in the dim, soft golds, gentle creams, muted rose tones. The air carried a scent of polished wood and lavender, soothing and familiar. This new place held no sense of urgency, no riddles, no puzzles, no rushing. It breathed softly, as though welcoming her with the patient quiet of a place that existed only for moments of deep stillness. Alice's descent was complete, yet her journey was only just beginning, not in movement, but in the unfolding of gentle reflection that awaited her in this hall of softly glowing doors. The hallway embraced Alice with a stillness unlike anything she had known. It felt ancient, yet newly formed, as though the dream had shaped it only moments before her arrival. Its length stretched far beyond what her eyes could measure, softened by a gentle haze that turned distance into a muted glow. The air inside it was perfectly calm, carrying the faint fragrance of pressed lavender and polished wood, warmed by unseen candlelight. A gentle light hovered along the corridor walls, not from lamps, but from the doors themselves. Each door glowed with its own subtle warmth, their halos pulsing in a slow rhythm that felt almost like breath. Some shimmered with hints of gold. Others had the faint blush of rose or the pale hush of moonlit silver. These lights did not illuminate the hall so much as bathe it in a comforting, dreamlike glow. Our shadows rested between them in soft folds, cool but not cold. Alice stood near the place where she had landed from her drifting descent. The moss-like floor cushioned her weight, springing back with a delicate resilience. She lifted one foot slowly, letting the texture imprint itself into her awareness. Soft, velvety, faintly cool. The sensation grounded her, reminding her that though this world was dream-woven, it held her with quiet certainty. Her eyes traveled along the hallway. Each door was slightly different, yet each belonged unmistakably to the same dream. Some were tall and slender, others round and compact, some carved with faint markings that resembled flowing vines or swirling clouds. Their shapes were gentle, their details softened as though sculpted from memory rather than wood. She took a slow step forward, but the air shifted subtly around her, reacting with the softness of fabric drawn by a breeze. As she walked, the glowing halos around the nearest doors brightened slightly, not to call her or persuade her, but simply to acknowledge her presence, as if the hall itself breathed a patient greeting. The first door she passed had a golden haze swirling across its surface. The patterns moved like sunlight rippling through leaves on a late afternoon. A faint whisper emanated from it, the sound of pages turning with infinite gentleness. Alice paused. She tilted her head slightly, listening. The murmur of pages seemed to tell a story she already knew, yet could not quite recall. It was not a story in words, but in sensations, warmth, patience, the comfort of sitting beside a window with ears folded softly behind her. She did not reach for the door. She only lingered beside it long enough to let its warmth settle into her. Then she moved on. Further along, a pale rose-colored door breathed in slow pulses. Its glow shimmered like the blush of dawn. When Alice stepped near it, the faint scent of blooming petals drifted around her, soft, delicate, untouched by wind or time. The whisper that came from this door was even softer, almost like a sigh, or the sound of a heart learning to rest after long seasons of movement. The sigh did not come from longing, but from release, a gentle letting go, a quiet acceptance. Alice felt something inside her respond, not with emotion, but with ease, a loosening of threads that had once tied curiosity into knots. She rested her hand lightly against the door without opening it. The surface was smooth and faintly warm, like porcelain warmed by sunlight. When she withdrew her hand, the glow dimmed slightly, settling back into its tranquil rhythm. She continued down the hall, her steps sinking softly into the velvety floor. The chamber held no echoes. Everything she did folded immediately into stillness, leaving the air as undisturbed as a pool of water at dawn. A little further ahead, she spotted a door made of pale silver. Its glow was the softest of all, barely perceptible unless she looked directly at it. The surface shimmered like moonlit water, shifting in gentle waves. When she drew near, the whisper from within was the faintest hum, a tone so quiet it felt more like vibration than sound. It traveled into her chest with a calming resonance, like the gentle thrum of distant bells at dusk. She placed her fingertips against its surface, while coolness spread through her hand, tracing her skin like soothing water. The hum deepened slightly, matching the pace of her breath. This door felt like stillness itself. Stillness not from emptiness, but from presence, the kind that remains when all thoughts have grown soft enough to rest. Alice withdrew her hand and breathed slowly, letting the tranquility of the door settle through her. A soft clarity followed, not an answer to any question, but the easing of the need to ask. She found herself smiling faintly at the sensation, her lips barely moving. As she walked further, the hallway began to widen, allowing more space between doors. The air grew cooler but also lighter, carrying faint ripples of whispered tones that drifted like threads of distant music. None of the whispers formed words. They were dream textures, hints of feelings, memories, reflections she could not quite name. She came to another door, smaller than the rest. Its glow was dim, almost shy. The wood looked aged, its grain marked with soft curves, like lines drawn by time itself. The whisper from within this one sounded like a single drop of water falling into a still pond, Alice knelt slightly to be level with it. The small door emanated a quiet warmth, comforting in its simplicity. She placed her hand on its surface and felt a gentle pulse beneath her palm, slow, steady, reassuring. For a moment, she sensed the quiet heart of her own childhood reflected back at her. Curiosity without urgency, wonder without seeking. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. Simply touching the door allowed its warmth to settle into her, like a memory soothed by time. Oh, she rose again and continued down the hall. Now, the hall seemed to breathe with her. Each step she took made the glowing doors pulse gently, as though acknowledging her passage. The colors blended in soft gradients along the walls, gold into gray, rose into lavender, lavender into pale silver. It was like walking through a living tapestry of quiet emotions. She approached a tall door, carved with faint swirls that resembled flowing currents of air. Its glow shifted with every breath she took, brightening on her inhale, softening on her exhale. The whisper behind this door sounded like distant wind moving through high branches. She raised her hand, hesitating just above the surface. The warmth that reached her felt familiar, though she could not say why. When her fingertips finally touched the door, yet a cool breeze brushed across her cheek, not from outside, not from any wind at all, but from memory. The breeze carried with it a sensation of spaciousness, of horizons stretching far in the mind while the body rested in stillness. Alice stepped back, letting the sensation drift away. The breeze faded as soon as she moved, replaced by the hall's quiet warmth. She continued walking until she reached the door that seemed to glow with the most steady and peaceful light. It was neither the brightest nor the most ornate. It simply felt balanced, soft gold mingling with pale ivory, forming a halo that breathed with gentle assurance. The whisper behind this door was the clearest she had heard. Not a sound, but a feeling, a sense of rest, a sense of choosing the path that led inward rather than outward. But Alice stood before it for a long moment, her breath deep and steady. She sensed that this door was not a threshold into a challenge or a riddle, but into the next layer of her dream, the layer where reflection became guidance. Her fingertips brushed the smooth wood. The glow surged softly beneath her touch, as though recognizing her. A warmth radiated through her hand and traveled slowly up her arm, settling in her chest as a tender calm. Without urgency, without expectation, the door eased open. The air behind it was cool and glowing, carrying the scent of night blossoms and the faint rustle of distant leaves. The pathway ahead was framed in gentle shadows, inviting and quiet. Alice stepped through the doorway, letting its soft light envelop her, guiding her deeper into the dream journey that waited beyond. The doorway closed behind Alice without a sound, as unobtrusive as a page being turned by a careful hand. She did not look back. The hall of whispering doors lingered in her awareness like a distant echo. Its soft lights and quiet pulses now folded into the deeper fabric of her dream. Ahead of her, a new world opened with the softness of unfolding silk. She stepped onto a path woven from pale earth and moss, its surface springy and cool beneath her feet. The air here was different from the hallway's lavender calm. It carried the fresh scent of open spaces, damp grass after twilight, distant water, and something faintly sweet, like clover hidden among leaves. A soft mist rested close to the ground, cradling the path and the roots of trees in a gentle, luminous haze. Above her, the sky had settled into a tranquil, endless dusk. It was neither fully night nor any shade of day she had known, more like the lingering glow that sometimes follows sunset in the quietest seasons. A few early stars rested in the highest reaches, not piercing the sky, but floating there like small, patient lanterns. Trees rose on either side of the path, their trunks slender and smooth, their branches arching overhead. Their leaves were deep, velvety green, edged with silver, where the sky's muted light touched them. As the branches shifted in some unseen, gentle wind, the leaves produced a sound like distant silk brushing together. Nothing rustled sharply. Every motion was softened, every sound rounded, as though the entire landscape had agreed to speak only in murmurs. Alice walked slowly, her steps unhurried, each one settling deeper into the dream. The mist curled around her ankles in delicate whirls, parting to allow her passage and then closing gently behind her. Fireflies glowed here and there among the lower branches, each tiny light blinking in a slow, unhurried rhythm. Their glow was pale gold, warm but not bright, like embers resting beneath a veil of ash. She lifted a hand to trace the outline of one tree as she passed. The bark felt unexpectedly smooth, like polished stone warmed by lingering sunlight. Beneath her fingers, the tree seemed almost to breathe, expanding and settling in time with the subtle, unspoken rhythm that held this place together. Somewhere ahead, a soft sound began to join the symphony of leaves and distant insects, a delicate tapping, steady but unhurried. It was not loud enough to startle, only distinct enough to notice. Tap, pause, tap, a measured rhythm, like the ticking of a clock that had forgotten how to hurry. Alice followed the sound, curiosity rising within her, not as a sharp point, but as a gentle tide. Her curiosity in this dream had changed. It no longer pulled her by the hand, demanding answers. Instead, it moved alongside her, patient and observant, simply wishing to witness whatever unfolded. The trees began to thin, giving way to a glade bathed in soft silver blue light. The mist here lay lower, like a faint, shimmering blanket across the ground. In the center of the glade, at the edge of a small, still pond, sat a figure in white. The White Rabbit. He was not as she remembered from tales and illustrations glimpsed in the waking world. There was no sense of haste about him, no frantic glancing, no hurried turning of pockets. Though he sat quite still upon a smooth stone, his long ears relaxed, his paws folded calmly in front of him. A small watch rested beside him on the stone, its chain coiled neatly, its face turned upward to the quiet sky. The watch was open, but its hands did not race. They moved, if at all, with such unhurried grace that their motion was almost imperceptible. The rabbit's fur was soft as cloudlight, white with a gentle sheen that caught the glow of the pond. His eyes held none of the wild urgency so often imagined in tales. Instead, they were clear and reflective, like deep pools that had known many dawns and many still evenings. When he turned his head and looked toward Alice, there was no surprise in his gaze, only recognition, as though her arrival had been expected in its own time all along. He did not rise in a rush. Instead, he inclined his head in a slow, almost ceremonial greeting. The pond beside him caught his reflection and Alice's own, blending them softly in its surface. The water was perfectly still, its surface unbroken by ripple or wind. It reflected the dusk sky and the faint stars, creating the illusion that the glade was held between two layers of quiet heavens. Alice stepped closer, her feet making no sound upon the moss. She stopped a short distance from him, feeling the calm that radiated from where he sat. It was a curious feeling, like standing near a clock that had chosen to slow itself in kindness, so that no moment would feel pushed or pressed. The rabbit's gaze moved gently to the watch at his side and then returned to Alice. There were no spoken words. None were needed. The gesture alone seemed to say, "There is time for everything, and more than enough time for stillness." A gentle breeze drifted through the glade. It carried the scent of the pond, cool, clean, edged with the faintest trace of lilies. The water's surface trembled only slightly, then settled again, its light patterns dancing slowly across the rabbit's fur and Alice's dress. She lowered herself to sit upon the moss, mirroring his posture without consciously deciding to. The ground welcomed her, soft and supportive beneath her. Her skirts settled around her in gentle folds, blending with the mist at her feet. Her hands rested loosely in her lap. She realized, with a quiet clarity, that she felt no urge to stand, no restlessness within her limbs. The glade seemed designed only for sitting, breathing, and simply being. The rabbit remained facing the pond, his ears angled in serene attentiveness. Would one paw occasionally brush the chain of the watch, not as if checking it, but as if acknowledging it. An old companion now tamed. It became clear that in this dream, time was no longer a sharp edge. It was a soft river, its current slowed to match the gentlest of heartbeats. Around them, the forest sounds settled into a harmonious murmur. Crickets hummed in low, steady phrases. The leaves overhead whispered their silk-soft language. A night bird called once from far away, its tone mellow and rounded, lingering in the air like a note of distant music. Alice's breath fell into rhythm with it all. Inhale, cool air, scented with water and moss. Exhale, warmth leaving her chest, dissolving into the mist. Each breath seemed to align her more closely with the glade's unhurried calm. She glanced at the watch resting beside the rabbit. The hands glowed faintly, painted in pale gold. They moved with such subtlety that one might have mistaken them for stillness. Time here did not tick. It flowed, like the slightest drift of water beneath a layer of glass. It neither hurried forward nor clung to what had passed. It simply continued, every moment equal in its softness. The rabbit tilted his head once more, as though noticing her attention. His nose twitched, a tiny, gentle movement. Instead of anxiety, there was a kind of quiet amusement in his gaze. Not mockery, but a shared understanding. Once, time had always seemed to run ahead. Here, it walked beside. He lifted his paw and, with slow deliberation, closed the lid of the watch. The faint click that followed was as soft as the closing of a book at the end of a well-loved chapter, but the sound rippled outward through the glade, not as a disturbance, but as a signal of even deeper rest. For a moment, even the crickets grew more hushed, as if listening. Alice felt an almost imperceptible shifting in her thoughts. Memories of days when hours had felt too short, when questions and tasks had filled her mind with a constant, busy flutter, floated to the surface, then drifted away like leaves on water. In their place, something quieter emerged. The idea that time could be held, not by grasping, but by resting fully in the moment that had arrived. She watched the rabbit, who now sat in absolute ease, paws resting atop the closed watch. His eyes were half-lidded, not from drowsiness, but from serenity. If there was anywhere he needed to be, any task he had yet to complete, it did not weigh upon him now. He belonged to this glade, to this stillness. Alice lowered her gaze to the pond. The reflections upon its surface had shifted. She could see herself, seated beside the rabbit, her posture more relaxed than she had ever imagined it could be in such an unfamiliar place. There was no furrow in her brow, no tightness around her mouth, only softness, only quiet. The sky in the reflection seemed deeper, its stars more numerous. Fireflies drifted above the water, their soft lights doubled by the pond's glass-like surface, creating clusters of warm glows that resembled distant constellations. Each tiny light flared gently, then faded, never in a hurry, never concerned with how long it burned. Another breeze passed over the glade, stirring the mist and gently ruffling the rabbit's fur. He did not move to smooth it. He let the breeze have its way, as though understanding that even such small changes were part of the calm, not disruptions of it. Alice's shoulders eased, the last remnants of any unnoticed tension melting away. Her hands opened slightly in her lap, fingers uncurling as if they, too, had been holding on to something they no longer needed. In this shared stillness, a quiet understanding formed, not through words, but through presence. The rabbit, once so often imagined as a frantic figure chasing time, had become the embodiment of something entirely different. The freedom to step out of rushing, to sit beside time instead of behind it. The glade seemed to respond to this understanding. The light subtly deepened, becoming richer, more velvety. The shadows grew softer, as if folding around them with protective tenderness. It felt as though the whole dream paused, not in suspense, but in reverence for the peace that had settled there. After an unmeasured length of this silence, the rabbit slowly unfolded his paws and rose to his feet. His movements were graceful and unhurried. The watch remained closed upon the stone, its chain coiled neatly beside it, unwilling to impose itself on the moment. He stepped down from the stone and onto the moss, each hop light and soundless. His white fur brushed the mist, leaving faint swirls that glowed for a second before fading. He did not look back at the watch. It would remain where it was, keeping time in its softened way, whether attended or not. Alice watched as he paused at the edge of the glade and glanced back toward her. His gaze held an invitation, not a command, not an urgency, simply an open path. If she wished to follow, the way was ready. If she wished to remain, the glade would hold her in equal kindness. She rose quietly, the moss cradling her steps, and chose to follow. Side by side, though not quite shoulder to shoulder, they moved along a new path that emerged between the trees. It was narrow but clear, illuminated by low clusters of glowing mushrooms and gently luminous stones. The air grew cooler in a refreshing way, scented with fern and faint traces of wild mint. The rabbit's pace was measured, each hop landing with patient care. He did not hurry, but he did not lag. He simply moved in a rhythm perfectly suited to the dream's new depth. Alice matched it easily, her footsteps falling in harmony with his. Time resumed its movement around them, but it had been transformed. No clock chased them, or no schedule pressed upon the path. The dream unfolded at the pace of soft footsteps and steady breath. Together, they left the glade behind, carrying its stillness with them like a quiet lantern, one that would continue to glow in the spaces between thoughts, long after the rabbit and his watch had passed from view. The path that unfolded before Alice and the rabbit seemed to weave itself out of the quiet they carried with them. It was narrow, yet clear, composed of soft earth traced with thin roots and edged with moss that glowed faintly in the dusk. The forest around them had changed from the gentle glade where they first rested beside the pond. Here, the trees grew taller, their trunks rising like slender pillars into the endless twilight sky. Branches arching together in long, graceful curves. Between those branches, the sky appeared in narrow ribbons, deep indigo brushed with strokes of violet, as if painted with a patient hand. A scattering of stars lingered there, not yet bright, but present, like small promises. Their light filtered through the leaves in delicate threads, settling on the forest floor in quiet, shifting patterns. All the air was cool and unexpectedly fragrant. Each breath carried hints of moss, damp bark, wild mint, and something sweeter still, perhaps unseen blossoms, or the scent of dreams taking shape. There was a sense of openness here, though the trees stood close. The forest felt wide in a way that did not depend on distance, but on possibility. Every shadowed space between trunks seemed to contain a path that might appear if one only approached with enough stillness. The rabbit moved with unhurried confidence, his white fur soft against the muted colors of the forest. The mist they had known in the glade faded into low, gentle strands that clung near the roots of trees, coiling around stones and small ferns. Fireflies hovered above these strands like floating embers, their pale gold glow bright enough to mark the way, yet soft enough not to disturb the night. Alice allowed her steps to fall into rhythm with the rabbit's slow, measured hops. Her shoes sank slightly into the earth with each step, leaving shallow impressions that filled almost immediately with the glow of firefly light and reflected sky. She ran her fingertips along the bark of passing trees, feeling the varied textures beneath her touch, some rough and slightly ridged, others surprisingly smooth, like glass covered in a thin layer of moss. Here and there, the forest opened into small clearings. Each opening was unique, shaped not by design, but by gentle chance. In one, mushrooms formed a quiet circle, their caps shining with pearly luminescence. In another, a fallen log lay covered in a silvery lichen that shimmered as if lit from within. Every clearing seemed to be a resting place for a thought not yet fully formed. Alice sensed that if she stepped into any one of these spaces and stood still long enough, something within her would gently unfold. Not a revelation in the way she once imagined, no sudden answers or declarations, but a soft knowing, like the quiet certainty that follows a deep breath. As they moved deeper into the forest, the rabbit's pace gradually slowed, not from weariness, but from recognition. He seemed attuned to a subtle shift in the air, a thinning of unseen boundaries, a softening of sound. After a time, he paused and turned his head, his ears tilting as though listening to something just beyond the edge of hearing. Alice stopped beside him, following his gaze. Ahead, the forest began to glow with a light that did not belong to the sky. It rose from the ground itself, a low, rippling luminance that shimmered between the trunks. The trees thinned slightly, giving way to a broad space where the earth flattened into a gentle, moss-covered slope. Tiny, floating lights drifted above this slope in graceful arcs, not fireflies, but larger, glowing orbs, each one softly pulsing with hues of blue, green, and pale gold. They moved like slow-moving stars, barely changing position, yet never still. Their paths overlapped, wove around one another, and then drifted apart again. The effect was of a living constellation, suspended just above the forest floor. The rabbit gave a small, calm nod toward this luminous clearing. His gaze seemed to say that his part of the journey, for now, had come to rest at its natural pause. He turned his eyes back to Alice one last time, eyed the serenity in them, now familiar, like a distant bell whose tone she had grown to recognize. Then, with a quiet bow of his head, he hopped off the path and into the undergrowth, the white of his fur blending quickly into mist and shadow. He did not vanish abruptly, but slowly, as if the dream were folding him gently into another chapter. Alice watched him until the last outline of his form drifted out of view, leaving behind only a lingering sense of calm and a closed watch, resting somewhere beside a still pond. She stood at the edge of the luminous forest space, feeling neither abandoned nor alone. The place itself now seemed to have taken up the role of guide. The lights ahead moved with such tenderness that it was impossible to feel anything but invited. Alice took a step forward. The ground beneath her feet became even softer, the moss deep and plush, almost like walking atop a layer of velvet. The air cooled further, brushing lightly against her cheeks and carrying with it a hint of distant rain that would never fall here, but whose memory lingered in the soil. As she entered the heart of the clearing, she noticed that the glowing orbs were not random. They traced paths through the air, faint but discernible, like trails drawn in slow, luminous ink. Some paths curved gracefully upward, others meandered at gentle angles. None were straight, none rushed. Each one seemed to represent a direction the dream might take, if she chose to walk beneath its light. This was a forest of possibilities, not of choices that demanded decision, but of pathways that existed simply to be seen, acknowledged, and perhaps someday followed. There was no urgency here, hung no sense that one path was better than another. Each trail of light moved at its own pace, intersecting others with effortless harmony. Alice moved slowly among them, lifting a hand to trace the air beneath a particularly bright orb. It drifted closer, its glow warming slightly, enveloping her fingers in a soft halo before continuing on its way. The sensation was neither hot nor cold, but something in between, a touch of presence, like water flowing around a stone without resistance. She paused beneath one of the longer streams of light. It arched overhead, bending like a luminous branch. Standing beneath it, she felt a subtle stirring in her chest, a quiet recognition. This light felt like a path of questions not yet asked, curiosities she had not yet formed words for, gentle wondering without the urgency of finding answers. But for a moment, she allowed herself to imagine walking beneath that arc, following its slow rise deeper into the unknown. But the thought did not come with any sense of restlessness. It was enough to simply know that the path existed, that it would be there whenever her steps were ready for it. She stepped onward. In another part of the clearing, the glowing orbs drifted closer together, forming clusters that resembled constellations. Some clusters shimmered with warmer colors, gold, rose, amber, while others glowed with cool blues and lilacs. Each cluster radiated its own feeling. One felt like the memory of laughter in a place where no one had yet laughed. Another felt like the soft ache of endings that had resolved into peace. Alice brushed the tips of her fingers near one of the cool-hued clusters. A hush fell briefly over the surrounding lights, as though the forest were listening. Then, gently, the orbs shifted, rearranging themselves into a new pattern. It was more open now, more spacious, with a clear space in the center, a pause made visible. She understood, in some quiet way, that this forest mirrored her inner landscape. Every shimmering path, every cluster of light, every pattern that formed and reformed was an echo of thoughts, feelings, and possibilities within her. Not pressing for attention, not clamoring to be chosen, but simply existing, waiting for the right moment to be noticed. In this place, uncertainty did not feel heavy. It felt expansive. The unknown was not a shadowed corridor, but a softly lit grove where each untraveled path remained patient. She walked deeper still, her steps slow, her senses tuned to the slightest changes in light and sound. The forest's sounds had shifted as well. The distant crickets she had heard in the glade now seemed to sing in longer, smoother phrases. Leaves rustled above her in undulating waves. like the ocean translated into air. Occasionally, a droplet of moisture fell from a leaf to the moss below, its impact producing a tiny, rounded sound that rang briefly in the quiet before dissolving back into stillness. Then, from somewhere above and to her left, a new tone entered the symphony of the forest. It was a low, warm hum, threaded with an almost playful curve. Not a song, not a word, but something in between. A presence announcing itself not with grandeur, but with ease. Alice turned her head slowly, following the sound. High up in the branches of a nearby tree, a ear shape began to appear. It did not descend or emerge all at once. Instead, it faded gently into view, as though the forest itself was composing it. At first, she saw only a pair of eyes, radiant and soft, glowing with a light that matched the gentle orbs around her. Then, gradually, a wide, curved smile took form beneath them, serene rather than mischievous. Last of all, the rest of the figure appeared, the lithe body and tail of a cat, striped in muted tones of violet and silver, its fur holding the shimmer of twilight. The Cheshire Cat. Yet, like the rabbit, he was not as the tales had painted him. No jagged grin, no sharp-edged laughter. His expression was calm, contemplative, almost affectionate in its quiet amusement. His eyes held the look of someone who had watched many dreams unfold and had long since learned to see them without judgment. He stretched languidly along the branch, claws lightly pressing into the bark. The tree did not protest. Its leaves merely shivered, releasing a gentle rain of silvery dust that drifted slowly down, vanishing before it touched the ground. The cat regarded Alice with a gaze that neither probed nor tested. It simply saw her, exactly as she was in that moment. And in that seeing, she felt no need to explain, justify, or even speak. The hum she had heard earlier returned, this time as a soft vibration in the air between them. It carried a suggestion of words without forming them. Something like, so many paths, and yet no need to walk them all at once. Alice stood beneath his branch, her head tilted slightly upward, as the lights of the forest brushed across her face, reflecting faintly in her eyes. For a long moment, they remained that way. Cat above, girl below, the quiet between them rich with unspoken understanding. The cat's tail swayed slowly back and forth, drawing invisible patterns in the air. As it moved, some of the nearby orbs of light drifted closer, trailing behind its motion like droplets of luminescence. They did not cling, but followed for a short distance before resuming their gentle wandering. The cat finally allowed a small, knowing smile to deepen along his features. Not a grin, but a curve that hinted at countless perspectives held lightly. He shifted his weight and padded quietly toward the edge of the branch, then lay down with his front paws hanging over, relaxed, his eyes half closed, as the way one might do when listening to distant music or watching clouds move slowly across the sky. A feeling flowed from him then, as clear and gentle as spoken reassurance. It is all right not to know. Alice felt those words without hearing them. She sensed their meaning settling into her like light sinking into water. For so long, possibility had meant decisions waiting to be made, paths waiting to be chosen. But here, in this forest, possibility meant something different. It was the comfort of knowing that paths could exist simply as paths, without demanding her immediate steps. The cat's gaze drifted upward, following one of the glowing trails that arched high above them. His tail tapped the branch lightly twice, tap, tap, as if marking the gentle movement of thought. Then his eyes lowered once more, returning to her. Oh, there was an invitation in his calm to stand here, in the midst of so many directions, and feel no pressure to select a single one. To let curiosity be not a chase, but a quiet appreciation of all that might someday be explored. The forest, attuned to this moment, seemed to breathe with them. The floating orbs slowed their paths slightly, as if pausing in acknowledgement. The air cooled by a whisper, refreshing without chill. Alice closed her eyes for a brief moment. In the darkness behind her eyelids, the forest of possibilities remained, lights drifting, paths arching. The cat poised in tranquil watchfulness. When she opened her eyes again, nothing had changed. And yet, something within her had grown more still. The need to decide softened. The urge to understand everything all at once faded. What remained was a quiet appreciation for the simple fact that all of this existed. The paths, the lights, the gentle guides, the silent encouragement. The cat's smile widened by a fraction, as if in approval. Then, slowly, he began to fade. Not abruptly, but in gentle stages. First, his body softened into misty outlines, leaving his eyes and smile suspended in the boughs. Then his eyes, luminous and kind, dissolved into the twilight. Last of all, the calm curve of his smile lingered for a few lingering heartbeats, then thinned into a line of shimmering light and vanished entirely. Yet his presence remained, not as a figure in the trees, but as a new space inside her, an inner clearing where questions could rest without answers and possibilities could wait without urgency. Alice stood alone among the floating lights, though she did not feel alone. Oh, the forest hummed with gentle assurance all around her. She knew that somewhere in this dream, the rabbit rested by his pond, and the cat reclined along some quiet branch, both keeping company with the night. The luminous paths continued their soft arcs overhead and around her, each one glowing with patient potential. She did not reach for them. She did not measure them. She simply watched, allowing the sight itself to settle her more deeply into peace. After a time, no clock to mark it, only breath, Alice turned, and a new path revealed itself between the trees. It glowed only faintly, less than the orbs and less than the stars, but enough to be seen. It did not pull her. It simply waited. She began to walk, carrying with her the stillness of the pond, the gentle rhythm of time, and the quiet wisdom of the forest that had taught her to stand amid countless possibilities without needing to choose. Her steps made no sound as she left the luminous clearing behind, the drifting lights gradually dimming at her back. Ahead, the forest deepened in color, shading into the hues of a garden not yet seen, a place where emotions themselves might soften and rest. Like roses in a moonlit bloom, the forest gradually thinned, not by abrupt ending, but by gentle opening. The tall trunks drew farther apart, and the luminous orbs that had guided Alice's steps slowly drifted upward, joining the dim constellations scattered across the dusk-shaped sky. The air changed as well, taking on a faint floral warmth that seemed to arrive on invisible currents. It smelled of petals and dew, of leaves that had been warmed by daylight and were now exhaling their stored softness into the night. The path beneath Alice's feet became smoother, its moss giving way to a fine velvety grass. It glowed faintly in shades of muted emerald, lit not by lamps, but by the subtle reflection of the sky and the unseen presence of quiet magic. The forest behind her was now a softened silhouette, still there, still breathing gently, but allowing her to move forward without looking back. Ahead, the landscape curved inward, forming a gentle basin of light. Hedges rose up on either side, trimmed into soft, undulating shapes. They were not sharp or imposing. Their edges were rounded, their leaves dense and deep green, as though carefully tended over many tranquil nights. A narrow archway opened between them, woven from intertwined branches bearing pale roses that glowed softly, each bloom a quiet lantern in the dusk. Alice paused before the archway. The petals above her head seemed to shimmer with a delicate inner light. Their scent, cool and sweet, drifted around her, mingling with the faint earthy aroma of freshly watered soil. It was a fragrance that suggested both growth and rest, as if the garden beyond held not only beauty, but the calm strength of something deeply rooted. She stepped through the archway. The garden unfolded around her in wide, gentle curves. Pathways of pale stone meandered through beds of roses, lilies, and low, silver-edged shrubs. Lanterns hung from curved iron stands, each lamp softly glowing, each flame small and steady, casting rounded pools of light upon the paths. The light was warm but never glaring, illuminating enough to guide, never enough to intrude. Roses of every shade seemed to grow here, but none of them clashed. Their colors, though varied, were softened into harmony by the dimness of the hour. Blush pinks, muted crimsons, creamy whites touched with a whisper of gold. Their petals folded inward in quiet spirals, some fully open, others still halfway closed, as though in their own slow process of waking and resting, while fountains, low and circular, rested at intervals throughout the garden. Their waters did not rush or roar. They flowed in gentle arcs, falling with the faintest rounded sounds into shallow pools. Ripples moved outward in concentric circles, distorting the reflections of lantern light and stars into shimmering patterns. The sound of the water mingled with the distant hum of unseen insects and the soft, rustling sigh of the hedges, creating an atmosphere where even silence felt carefully tended. Alice walked along one of the stone paths, her shoes making the slightest, muffled sound as they met the smooth surface. On either side of her, the flower beds were bordered by low hedges, creating distinct shapes, rounded squares, soft ovals, winding ribbons. She noticed with a quiet awareness that nothing here spilled over its boundary. The hedges did not encroach on the paths. The flowers did not crowd one another. Every plant, every bloom seemed to hold its own space with gentle clarity. It was a garden of order, but not rigidity. It did not feel strict. It felt composed. As she moved deeper into it, the air seemed to thicken slightly, not with heaviness, but with intention. There was a sense that everything in this space had been placed with care, trimmed with patience, and allowed to flourish without chaos. Emotion itself seemed to be held here in a softened form, like water guided by the gentle curve of a riverbank. At the center of the garden, where several paths converged, a wider clearing opened. A circular lawn of soft grass lay there, edged by rose bushes, shaped into graceful arcs. In the very middle of this circle stood a single, this elegant tree with a pale trunk and wide sheltering branches. Lanterns hung from its limbs, swaying slightly in the breeze, their light reflected in the glossy leaves. Beneath the tree, on a stone bench surrounded by low-growing flowers, sat the Queen of Hearts. Yet she, too, was not as the stories had once told. There was no storm in her expression, no sharpness in the set of her jaw. She sat with her back straight but relaxed, her hands resting loosely atop one another in her lap. Her gown was rich in color, deep red, softened by velvet textures, embroidered with delicate patterns of vines and small hearts. But it seemed designed more for stillness than spectacle. The fabric pooled quietly around her feet, not flaring or clashing with its surroundings, but blending into the garden's muted splendor. Her crown, though present, was slender and understated, its gold catching the lantern light in small, subtle glimmers. Her eyes when she lifted them to regard Alice, were steady and composed. They did not blaze, they observed. There was a depth in them, the kind that might have once given rise to tempests, now channeled into a calm, unwavering gaze. Alice stopped a respectful distance away, sensing instinctively that in this garden, closeness and distance were both honored and gently measured. The Queen inclined her head the slightest degree, a gesture that was neither haughty nor overly warm. It felt like an acknowledgement of shared presence, the kind that passes between two people who are, for now, content simply to exist in the same quiet space. For a moment, neither of them moved. The fountains continued their steady murmuring. All the lanterns swayed gently overhead. A breeze moved through the garden, lifting the edges of the Queen's gown, brushing past Alice's hair, stirring the roses into a soft, rustling chorus. Somewhere, a night bird sang a single elongated note, then fell silent again, as if bowing out of a scene that required no additional sound. In that stillness, Alice began to sense something about this place. The garden was not merely a collection of plants and paths. It was an arrangement of feeling. The trimmed hedges, the balanced beds, the rounded shapes, and softly glowing lamps, all of them felt like external reflections of an inner landscape that had learned, slowly and carefully, how to hold itself together without shutting itself off. The Queen's presence seemed to be the heart of that landscape, not in a way that dominated, but in a way that anchored. Her gaze lingered on Alice, and in that quiet observation, there was neither judgment nor indulgence. It felt instead like a gentle weighing, not of worth, but of state, as though the Queen, simply by sitting there, could sense the currents beneath the surface of another's emotions. The restlessness, the calm, the lingering echoes of earlier scenes in the dream. Alice, however, did not feel exposed. She felt seen the way a garden might be seen by its caretaker, appreciated for its current state, gently aware of what might be tended in time, but never forced to bloom before it was ready. At the Queen's feet rested a small pair of shears, not sharp or menacing, but finely made, their handles shaped to fit a careful hand. They lay closed upon a folded cloth, their metal catching only the faintest glint of light when the lanterns swayed. Nearby, a shallow basket held a few trimmed branches, their leaves still fresh and green, their removal having strengthened, not harmed, the plants from which they'd been taken. The Queen's hands remained resting in her lap, nowhere near the shears. She did not seem preoccupied with cutting or shaping at this moment. Instead, she seemed wholly present in the act of simply sitting in her garden, letting it be as it was. Alice's attention drifted from the Queen to the roses surrounding them. Some bushes were pruned into gentle domes, others into long, curving lines that guided the eye along the edges of the clearing. The blossoms themselves were full and open, but none appeared overcrowded. Every flower had enough room to breathe, or to turn its petals outward without pressing forcibly against its neighbors. There was a quiet lesson in that arrangement. Boundaries, she realized, were not walls erected out of harshness. They were gentle lines that allowed everything within them to flourish more peacefully. As if in response to that unspoken realization, the Queen's gaze softened a fraction. Her shoulders eased, though they had never truly been tense. One of her hands shifted slightly atop the other, the fingers relaxing, the gesture barely perceptible but somehow significant. The air around them grew warmer, as though the garden itself approved of whatever understanding had begun to dawn. Time passed in this way, unmeasured yet full. Alice eventually moved closer, drawn not by command, but by the natural pull of shared stillness. As she approached along the curved path that circled the central tree, the stone cool beneath her steps. When she reached the nearest edge of the soft lawn, she stopped again, leaving a respectful space between herself and the Queen's bench. That space felt neither empty nor awkward. It felt right. She looked down at the grass between them. It was short, evenly cut, and lush, its color deepened by the low light. Tiny dewdrops clung to some of the blades, catching the lantern glow and scattering it into minuscule shards of silver. Each droplet remained where it was, held in place by surface tension and the gentle balance of air and leaf. Alice realized that this, too, echoed the garden's quieter truth. Emotions could rest like dew, visible, present, glimmering in the light, without needing to spill over or evaporate too quickly. But they did not have to be banished, nor did they need to flood. At last, the Queen lifted one hand from her lap and extended it with a gracious, controlled motion toward the garden around them. The gesture was small, but it carried a sense of explanation, as though she was saying, "This is what happens when feeling is given form with care." Alice followed the motion of her hand, letting her eyes wander the arcs of roses, the aligning paths, the fountains with their gentle, unbroken flow. The Queen's garden did not deny intensity. It had clearly grown from it. The deep reds of the roses, the vivid greens, the rich textures of fabric and leaf, all suggested a heart that once might have burned too hot. But here, that fire had been guided, soothed into embers that warmed rather than scorched. She looked back at the Queen, whose expression remained composed. Yet, behind that composure, there was an unmistakable tenderness. It was the kind that flickers into existence only after storms have been understood, if not entirely forgotten. Without words, the garden spoke of a time when emotions might have surged unchecked, when anger, passion, or hurt might have demanded to be seen in sudden, sharp ways. But this place, this dream of the queen, showed what became possible once those tides were channeled gently into structure, into care, into patient tending. A nearby rosebush caught Alice's attention. One branch had been pruned recently. She could see where it had been cut, the line clean and smooth. Yet the rest of the bush seemed all the healthier for it, its blossoms fuller, its leaves glossy and vibrant. She imagined the queen, shears in hand, on deciding with calm precision what to keep and what to release. The image did not frighten her, it comforted her. For in that act of pruning, there was no violence. There was only the understanding that to let a thing grow well, some parts must be gently trimmed away, not with cruelty, but with kindness toward the whole. The queen's eyes met hers again. In that gaze, Alice sensed an invitation to learn how to tend the garden within herself in the same way, to recognize her own surges of feeling, not as enemies or forces to be suppressed, but as roses to be guided, shaped with patience, allowed space, and given rest. The fountains continued their tender song. Water rose and fell in arcs that never spilled beyond their basins, their motion continuous but contained. It was as if the garden were breathing this balance in and out, with each cycle, reinforcing the lesson of quiet resolve. Alice let her shoulders soften, mirroring the garden's composure. Thoughts and memories drifted through her mind. Moments when her emotions had felt too large, too quick, too bright. Times when curiosity had become agitation, when disappointment had risen like a sudden wave, when excitement had rushed ahead of her, leaving her breathless. Here, beneath the lantern-lit tree, those memories no longer felt overwhelming. They appeared like untrimmed branches in need of gentle shaping. Nothing more, nothing less. In time, the queen rose from her bench with fluid grace. Her gown whispered against the stone, the fabric moving like liquid shadow. She did not tower over Alice, nor diminish her. Oh, she simply stood as one complete presence before another. With one hand, the queen reached for the small shears resting on the cloth at her side. She picked them up, turning them once so that the lantern light glinted off their smooth surface. Then, in a gesture that felt almost ceremonial, she set them back down. It was as though she was saying, "The tools are here, but tonight they need not be used. The knowledge of them is enough." She inclined her head once more toward Alice, then toward the garden, as if acknowledging the connection between the two. The roses stirred faintly in the breeze. The hedges seemed to stand a little taller, their lines more lovingly defined. Alice understood that she was being gently invited to carry this image with her. A garden where emotions had form, where boundaries were soft yet clear, where intensity was not banished but guided into beauty. She took one last look around, the fountains, the paths, the lanterns swaying softly in the branches. The entire garden seemed to exhale with her, releasing any lingering tension from the air. Then, with the same quiet assurance that had brought her here, a new path opened in the distance. A passage framed by arches of intertwined branches, leading away from the garden and toward a softer, more reflective light. The queen returned to her bench, her presence settling once more at the center of the garden's gentle order. She did not watch Alice leave. She did not need to. The garden itself and all that it had taught would go with her. Alice stepped lightly onto the new path, feeling the strength of quiet resolve beneath her feet. The scent of roses followed her for a while, and then gradually faded, replaced by the cool, clear fragrance of open air and distant water. Ahead, the sound of a still lake began to form on the horizon of her senses, a place where everything she had seen and felt could meet in silent reflection. With each breath, her mind grew calmer. Her heart felt steadier. Her steps, guided now by all she had learned, became the bridge between the garden of quiet resolve and the next deeper stillness, waiting in the dream. The path leading away from the queen's garden curved gently, as if drawn by a patient hand rather than carved by footsteps. The fragrance of roses lingered only faintly now, soft echoes of a place that had taught her how feeling could settle into form. With each step, the scent thinned, replaced by the cool breath of open air, carrying the quiet promise of water nearby. The trees grew sparser here, allowing long sweeps of sky to become visible between their branches. The dusk overhead deepened into a silken indigo, brushed with hints of lavender, as though night were arriving not all at once, but gradually, respectfully. The twilight stars brightened one by one, each one glowing with a soft confidence. The path beneath Alice's feet changed as she walked. The velvety grass of the garden gave way to smoother ground, covered in fine, the silver-washed pebbles that shimmered like distant starlight. These stones made almost no sound when she stepped on them. Instead, they seemed to settle themselves beneath her weight, shifting just enough to cradle her foot before restoring their quiet order. A hush settled over the landscape, not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of arrival, as though she were nearing the heart of the dream. The trees parted fully at last, opening into a wide, tranquil clearing. At its center lay a lake so still it looked like polished glass. Its surface reflected the sky with perfect clarity. The indigo, the faint light of stars, and the sweeping arc of a moon not yet fully risen. A thin mist hovered above the water, moving almost imperceptibly, its slow drifts blurring the line between reflection and reality. and the air here was cool and fragrant, with the scent of faint minerals, damp stone, and night-blooming flowers. It felt cleansing, as if every breath she drew washed lightly through her thoughts. Alice paused at the lake's edge, feeling the weight of stillness surrounding her. The water's edge was lined with smooth stones in shades of dove gray, slate blue, and soft white. She lowered herself onto one of the flatter stones, noting the faint warmth stored from daylight. Her hands rested upon its surface, the texture cool under her fingertips, grounding her in a way that felt both steady and profoundly gentle. The world around her was so quiet that she could hear the softest sounds, the brush of mist against water, the occasional distant chirp of an unseen insect, the near silent shifting of a leaf falling through the air. In such a hush, her own breath seemed like part of the landscape. She let it flow slowly, inhaling deeply, exhaling without urgency. Her reflection appeared in the lake, softened by the mist, shaped by moonlight, more suggestion than detail. She leaned forward slightly, watching the water's surface respond with the faintest ripple, then calm again. Her reflection steadied. It was not a perfect likeness. The dream had softened it, rounding its edges, filtering its lines through the quiet that lay between worlds. And yet, she recognized herself, not as she had been in the familiar stories, but as she was now within this journey of calm and unfolding stillness. The face looking back at her held no confusion, no restlessness. Instead, there was a serene openness. Her eyes seemed deeper, her posture more relaxed, her entire form softened into harmony with the lake's stillness. As she gazed into her reflection, something unexpected began to shift inside her. A faint shimmer passed across the water, not a ripple, but a glimmer of light rising from beneath. It grew slowly, its brightness gentle, forming a second reflection beside her own. She watched as the shimmer clarified into a smaller figure, a child, herself, but younger. The younger Alice sat upon the water's surface as though it were solid ground, her legs folded, hands resting lightly upon her knees. Her face held the innocence of a mind always filled with questions, eyes bright with boundless curiosity. But in this dream, even that curiosity had softened. The child smiled, not with mischief or impatience, but with quiet wonder. Her eyes reflected the moonlit ripples with a composure that belied her age. The two Alices, the present and the past, regarded one another with a calm that felt like recognition across time. The younger Alice tilted her head, as though listening to a faraway song. Her small hands moved to her lap, gently tracing the invisible shapes of thoughts and possibilities. There was no restlessness in her movements. Instead, they carried the serenity of someone who knew she had nothing to prove, nothing to chase, nothing to solve in that moment. The present Alice felt something soften in her chest. Memories drifted through her mind. Times when curiosity had burned too brightly, when questions had bubbled up faster than answers could be found, when the world had seemed filled with puzzles demanding to be unraveled. So she remembered moments when she'd mistaken the urge to know for the need to hurry, mistaking motion for progress. But here, beside the lake, with her younger self gazing back, she realized something quietly profound. Curiosity did not require urgency. Wonder did not depend on speed. Questions could exist without demanding answers. They could rest like petals floating on water, held by stillness rather than agitation. The younger Alice raised a hand and touched the surface of the lake. The water responded in concentric ripples that spread outward with perfect symmetry, then dissolved into calm again. She looked up at her older self with a gentle, knowing smile, as though offering an unspoken message. It is all right to slow down. It is all right to grow quiet. It is all right to rest. And the present. Alice lifted her own hand and mirrored the motion, touching the lake as lightly as a falling leaf. The water glowed faintly beneath her fingertips, not with brightness, but with warmth. The glow expanded in slow ripples, touching the reflection of her younger self, who closed her eyes briefly, accepting the gesture. The two reflections seemed to merge for a moment, overlapping, sharing space, as if the dream itself had woven them together. The younger figure blurred, then softened, then blended gently into the reflection of the older Alice, becoming one. As the last shimmer faded, the lake returned to its perfect stillness. Alice inhaled, feeling the air fill her with a cool brightness. Her exhale carried away old echoes, unnecessary urgency, the weight of unanswered questions, and the fluttering tension that once lived beneath her curiosity. Each breath became a soft release, dissolving into the mist above the lake. Her gaze drifted upward, toward the sky mirrored on the water. The stars reflected there looked closer than those above, as though the lake held a version of the night more intimate, more attuned to her thoughts. Somewhere in the distance, the faint hoot of an owl echoed. It was a slow, rounded sound, carrying neither warning nor direction. It simply existed, a nocturnal note in a nocturnal world. Alice's shoulders eased further, sinking into the warmth of the stone beneath her. She rested her palms flat on its surface, feeling the solidness beneath her, grounding her even as the dream deepened. She did not try to analyze what she had seen. She did not question whether the younger reflection had spoken or whether the merging had meant something specific. In this place, meaning did not need articulation. It unfolded gently, like moonlight stretching across water. Moments, or perhaps many minutes, passed in the quiet. The lake breathed with her, its stillness shifting only with the faintest drift of mist. The air grew even cooler, but never cold, embracing her as though wrapping her in a shawl woven from the night itself. The stone she sat upon pulsed with a warmth that felt almost alive, subtle, steady, reminiscent of the warmth left behind by the sun she could no longer see. She pressed her palms into it and felt that warmth travel upward, soothing the space between her ribs, calming the quiet flutter of her heart. As she sat there, she sensed the approaching of something, not a figure, not a sound, but a gentle readiness. A sense that the reflection she had witnessed had been the inner threshold of her dream, and that passing through it had aligned her with the heart of Wonderland's softened form. Possibility, once vast and shimmering, had narrowed into something more intimate. Not a forest of countless paths, but a single, quiet understanding. Curiosity was not lost in stillness. It found room to breathe. She lifted her face to the sky, letting moonlight bathe her features. Her hair moved in the light breeze, catching faint silver in its strands. The mist curled around her in soft spirals, embracing her without binding her. The moment felt endless and brief all at once. The kind of moment that left a lasting echo without leaving a single sharp edge. Eventually, the lake began to change, not with motion, but with light. The reflection of the sky seemed to grow brighter, as though dawn was stirring somewhere just beyond the dream's horizon. The mist thinned, revealing more of the water's surface. The stars within it shimmered softly, then receded into deeper layers of reflection. Alice understood the signal. The dream was guiding her to her next step, toward rest, toward return. She rose slowly from the stone, feeling the earth beneath her accept her weight with calm assurance. Her hands brushed against her dress, smoothing fabric that had never truly wrinkled. She took in the lake one last time. The stillness of it now mirrored inside her, a quiet pool where younger and older selves coexisted with ease. At the far edge of the clearing, a narrow path formed, lit by faint, pearl-colored light. It waited in silence, inviting her toward the final movement of her dream. Alice stepped toward it, each footfall soft and steady, leaving behind no imprint. Only the echo of stillness she now carried within her. The path that unfolded from the lakeside carried with it the same softness that now rested within Alice's chest. It curved gently away from the water, its pale, pearl-colored light guiding her steps without insisting on speed. Each footfall felt like a continuation of the stillness she had found at the lake, not a departure from it. The ground beneath her was smooth and faintly luminous, as though made from compacted moonlight and mist. It yielded just enough to soften her steps, then settled quietly back into place, leaving no visible mark. The air around her remained cool, but it had taken on a delicate warmth as well, a breath of comfort woven into the night's calm. The trees that flanked the path grew fewer and more slender, their branches reaching up in graceful lines that framed wide openings of sky. And the twilight above had deepened further. Yet it did not feel like darkness pressing inward. Instead, it resembled an endless, quiet canopy holding the world below in a gentle cradle. Stars gleamed more steadily now, their light less like distant pinpricks and more like small, steady flames. Their reflections still lingered faintly in her mind's memory of the lake, but their presence here felt different, less like a mirror, more like silent companions watching over her as she walked. A soft breeze moved along the path, carrying with it traces of all the places she had visited in the dream. The faint sweetness of roses, the cool clarity of water, the earthy green of moss and leaves, the clean scent of polished wood and glowing doors. Each fragrance passed through the air like a memory, she brushing gently against her senses before drifting on. Alice inhaled these fragrances with slow, steady breaths. On each exhale, something within her seemed to settle further, as though layers of restlessness were falling away one by one, dissolving into the quiet. As she continued, the path began to widen, and the landscape softened into a kind of dreamlike openness. She saw no specific shapes at first, only gentle gradients of shadow and light. But as she walked, familiar impressions began to emerge and hover at the edges of her awareness. To her left, she glimpsed the suggestion of the hall of whispering doors, a row of softly glowing shapes fading in and out of view, their halos pulsing in slow, familiar rhythms. They did not call to her. They simply offered a last, quiet acknowledgement, as though bowing in farewell. A little farther ahead, she sensed the presence of the white rabbit's glade. It appeared like a faint echo, an outline of trees, the pale suggestion of a pond, the distant shape of a stone where a watch once rested. The glade seemed wrapped in an even deeper hush now, as if it had tucked itself back into the folds of the dream, satisfied that its lesson about time had taken root. To her right, the forest of possibilities shimmered at the border of her perception. The luminous orbs floating between the trees were dimmer now, their gentle arcs more placid, as if preparing to drift upward and merge with the stars. The sense of countless paths remained, but their presence had grown lighter, more spacious, like a thought remembered fondly in the moment before sleep. Overhead, she sensed rather than saw the Cheshire Cat's lingering smile. No longer a visible curve in the branches, but a quiet ease in the air itself. It felt like a reminder that uncertainty could be held loosely, without fear. The Queen's Garden, too, made itself felt in subtle ways. The faint scent of roses returned for a moment, mingling with the night air. A sense of structure hovered around her steps, as though the careful paths and ordered hedges had left an imprint on the very way she moved through the dream. Each of these impressions glowed softly for a moment at the periphery of her awareness, then dimmed, folding gently into the vast tapestry of the night. They did not vanish abruptly. They receded slowly, lovingly, like a lantern's glow, thinning with distance, but never quite going out. Alice understood, without needing to think it through, that Wonderland was not disappearing. It was simply returning to its place within her. No longer a realm of confusion or bewildering change, but a landscape of calm she could revisit whenever her heart moved toward stillness. The path's light grew softer, changing from pearl to a familiar golden hue. The color of lamplight filtered through a quiet room. The air, too, shifted in tone. The fragrance of night-blooming flowers gave way to the subtle scent of wood, fabric, and the faint, comforting trace of cooled tea. The vastness of the dream world around her slowly began to narrow, like a lens gently focusing. The wide sky above softened into a lighter haze, the stars receding into a velvety brightness that felt closer, more intimate. The sensation was not of being pulled out of a dream, but of the dream itself, drawing nearer to the waking world, aligning gently with it. With each step, the sense of her own body became more distinct, not heavy, but familiar. The touch of fabric against her skin, the quiet movement of her breathing, the subtle rhythm of her heartbeat, all rose in her awareness, not as distractions, but as anchors. The light ahead brightened by degrees until it became a warm, steady glow, pooling around a shape she recognized. A window, a chair, a room she had left not long ago, and yet, somehow, an entire journey away. The path merged seamlessly into the floor beneath her chair, as if it had been there all along, waiting to be noticed. She found herself standing beside the very place where she had once sat, gazing out at the fading day, her fingers resting upon the edge of the windowsill. Now, the room greeted her with a tender familiarity. The lamplight cast its soft golden radiance across the walls and shelves, just as it had before, but its glow felt deeper somehow, warmer, steadier. Shadows stretched across the floor in gentle, elongated shapes, their edges blurred by the calm stillness in the air. The cup of tea still rested on its saucer nearby, a faint curl of steam rising from its surface. The fragrance was milder now, but it still carried notes of soothing herbs. Dust motes drifted lazily through the lamplight, suspended in the air like tiny echoes of the fireflies she had seen in the forest. The ticking of a distant clock reached her ears again. Its steady rhythm no longer sounded like a reminder of passing time. Instead, it seemed like a quiet heartbeat in another room, a gentle metronome keeping pace with the slow unfolding of night. Alice stood for a moment, simply breathing in the room. It felt both unchanged and transformed, as places often do when the person standing in them has changed. The quiet of the space now mirrored the quiet within her, and this balance made the room feel like a sanctuary. She moved toward the chair she had left behind at the very start of her drifting. Her fingertips brushed the back of it, feeling the smooth wood rounded by time. The cushion still held the faint impression of where she had once sat, and she lowered herself into it once more, letting her body settle gently. From her place by the window, she looked out at the night beyond. The outside world was calm. The garden lay in shadow, our leaves glinting faintly with starlight. No hurried figures passed. No noises rose to disturb the hush. It was simply the world at rest, mirroring her own inner quiet. She let her gaze soften, not focusing on any one detail. The window pane's glass held a faint reflection of her face again, similar to the reflection she had seen in the lake, though less dreamlike, more grounded. And yet, she recognized that something of the lake's stillness had followed her here. Her eyes looked calmer. Her shoulders rested more easily. The slight tension that might once have lingered at the corners of her mouth had dissolved, replaced by the trace of a thoughtful, peaceful softness. She remained like this for a time, neither thinking nor resisting thought, simply letting awareness drift as naturally as mist across water. Of memories of Wonderland flickered through her mind, but they did so in gentle, distant strokes. The slow, spiraling descent lit by drifting lights. The hall of doors breathing in quiet pulses. The rabbit resting beside his watch at the pond's edge. The forest lit by floating possibilities. The Cheshire cat's serene, understanding eyes. The queen in her garden of carefully tended emotion. The smaller, younger self who had smiled at her from the lake. Each image arrived, lingered, then faded into a soft glow that warmed but did not stir. After some time, Alice rose from the chair, her movements slow and unhurried. She turned from the window and walked toward her bed. The covers were neatly folded back, inviting and unassuming. The pillow waited, its surface smooth, its fabric cool to the touch. She placed one hand upon the blanket, feeling the weave of the cloth beneath her fingers. It was familiar, textured just enough to remind her that this was the world of touch and rest, where bodies lay down and loosen themselves into sleep. She slipped beneath the covers with practiced ease, drawing them up to her chest. The fabric settled lightly over her, its weight perfectly balanced, neither too heavy nor too light. As she adjusted herself against the pillow, she felt the softness cradle the back of her head, supporting the gentle curve of her neck. Her hands came to rest loosely atop the blanket, fingers relaxed. Her eyes fell half closed, then fully closed, as the lamplight behind her eyelids turned into a warm, hazy glow. The faint ticking of the clock blended with the softness of her breath, creating a private lullaby made of rhythm and breath. Inside her, a wonderland had quieted. It no longer flickered with fantastical surprises or puzzling turns. It now resembled a series of sunken gardens and still pools, places she could revisit with a single willing thought whenever she wished to walk once more among glowing doors, resting rabbits, luminous paths, and moonlit lakes. But she did not need to revisit them now. Their lessons had already settled into her, like seeds beneath soft soil awaiting distant seasons. In the gentle dark behind her closed eyes, the impressions of the dream rearranged themselves one last time, not into a story that demanded remembering, but into a feeling that could simply be carried. Curiosity at peace, imagination at rest, emotion held with kindness, possibility without pressure, self-meeting, self in quiet acceptance. Her breathing deepened, each inhale drawing in the calm of the room, each exhale releasing the last remnants of the day's busyness. Her thoughts grew lighter, softer, dissolving not into blankness, but into a vast, quiet openness where nothing needed to be done. Outside the window, a light breeze moved through the night. Leaves whispered together in low, soothing tones. Somewhere in the distance, a small animal shifted in the grass, then grew still again. The world was settling, piece by gentle piece, into its own sleep. The lamplight, still burning, seemed to understand that its work was nearly done. Its golden glow thinned at the edges, growing softer and more diffused. Shadows merged and blurred, their outlines losing importance as darkness wrapped the room in a deeper, velvety hush. If there were any questions left in her, questions about dreams, about days yet to come, about paths not yet taken, they had curled up quietly now, content to wait. They did not tug at her mind or ask to be answered. They only rested alongside her like friendly shapes at the foot of the bed, patient and untroubling. The room's silence grew more profound, but never hollow. It was filled with the gentle sounds of continued life. The whisper of her breath, the slow, steady rhythm of her heart, the faintest creak of settling wood as the night embraced the house. Her body grew heavier, comfortably so, as though the bed had become an extension of the earth itself, supporting her without condition. Her limbs relaxed, releasing their last traces of tension. Her face softened, brow smooth, lips at ease. In this tenderness of almost sleep, Wonderland gave one final, quiet bow inside her. Not with a flourish, not with a fanfare, but with the simple, graceful retreat of a dream that had accomplished all it needed to it. Its colors faded into the background of her mind, leaving behind only a pervasive sense of peace. The stillness around her deepened into a cradle of rest, and slowly, seamlessly, thought dissolved into drifting. Drifting dissolved into dreaming. Dreaming softened into sleep. Sleep well, dream softly, and may the night hold you kindly.